Angie was told that there was a secret unlike any other in the world, and that Vishal would never succumb to sleep nor change until the final purification. Her mother, Lady, asked if Angie had finished her preparations, reminding her that when the noble blessing was shed, those who endured would be granted an incorruptible life. Angie responded that she had finished. She was ready to go, and so the time of transcendence would begin. For the first time in her life, Angie received an invitation to the Duke's manor. She lived on Cullinan Island, a place with lush beach forests and rolling blue waves that splashed against its shore. Suddenly, Angie was taken by a flashback. She had been nurtured by the survivors of a devastating war on the mainland who had transformed it into a land of abundance. People of various races coexisted peacefully, bound together like kin, all guided by the fate of Kylam and a shared purpose. Angie moved to the island with her parents at such a young age that she had no recollection of the mainland. Yet she had no desire to cling to those distant memories, for she loved the island deeply. She could not envision a more perfect place than this, and all of it was made possible by the benevolence of the Duke and his family. As she traveled, Angie found herself marveling at the Duke's carriage, finally realizing the gravity of the moment. She had been invited to keep Lord Kylek company, something she could hardly believe. Her mother had told her that Lord Kylek was the sole heir to House Blackwell, the rulers of the island, but he had been confined to his manor due to a long illness. Angie was to visit Lord Kylek once a week to keep him company. Her mother warned that the young nobleman had grown particular and sensitive due to his illness, which could lead him to treat her unkindly. But Angie understood the importance of this visit, for her family owed a great debt of gratitude to House Blackwell. She hoped that Lord Kylek would appreciate the preparations she had made for him. The gates to the Duke's manor opened, and an older woman named Louise Dunst, the head housekeeper, welcomed Angie inside. Angie greeted her politely, and Louise instructed her to step inside, as the young master was waiting. As Angie entered, she was awestruck by the interior of the castle. It was lavish yet elegant, almost as though she had stepped into a different world entirely. As Angie explored, she noticed several portraits on the walls. She realized that this spot must be reserved for the young lord, though there was no portrait of him yet. She wondered what he looked like, imagining that he might have blue-gray eyes like Duke Edward Blackwell. Louise called for Angie's attention, guiding her further. There were a few important things Angie needed to remember. She wouldn't be able to see the master's face, as he was quite unwell, and if anything seemed out of place, she should call for help. She was also told to answer only the questions asked of her and to refrain from asking unnecessary questions. Angie nodded, understanding the rules. Louise looked at Angie with a strange expression before knocking on a door. She politely asked if she could enter. When the door opened, it revealed the interior of the room. Angie took a deep breath, reflecting on the reality of being in his space. Louise then announced that she had brought the girl meant to be his. However, Killick's faint and irritated voice replied, expressing his displeasure. He reminded Louise that he had made it clear there were to be no more visits. Angie stood frozen in confusion, wondering how it was possible that he didn't want any visitors. There were rumors circulating that the reason Lord Kylek had not been seen outside his residence was due to the intensive chemical treatments he had undergone during his prolonged illness, which had left his face disfigured. The sight of his grotesque appearance was said to render people rigid, as if they had gazed upon Medusa herself. This, Angie thought, could be why he objected to her presence. Despite the rumors, she was nervous, but it wasn't about his appearance. Louise, the housekeeper, apologized for not seeking Kylek's permission before bringing Angie in. She explained that she had been unable to disobey Lord Kylek's father's orders. Kylek sighed in response, acknowledging that Louise couldn't disobey his father. He forgave her this time, but warned her not to expect such mercy in the future. Louise promptly left the room. Then Louise whispered to Angie, urging her to go ahead and do what she had come there for. Angie, though anxious, reminded herself of her mother's words about repaying the family's debt to House Blackwell. But what if Lord Kylek cast her out? Before Angie could ponder further, Kylek's voice called out to her. He told her to come closer, but not to get too near, just stay by the window. Angie hurried over to the chair by the window and sat down. Kylek then asked for her name, and Angie responded, introducing herself as Angela, though she said she preferred to be called Angie. She mentioned that she was the daughter of Rizdal, the keeper of the North Shore cottage. Kylek asked why she had come, and Angie explained that she had been honored with the great privilege of keeping him company. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if he would find her story dull, but decided to proceed. Since he had allowed her to remain, she wanted to read him what she had prepared. Kylek, intrigued, asked her about the story. Angie explained that it was merely a product of her imagination, but she asked if he would like to hear it. As she began to tell the story, Angie thought about how her great passion was reading, and the skills she felt most confident in were sewing and embroidery. She realized that her humble attempts at lacework would likely not impress someone like Lord Kylek, who had grown accustomed to luxury. She imagined that during his confinement to the mansion, the multitude of books he must have read surpassed her own modest collection. But she also thought that perhaps Lord Kylek had experienced moments similar to the ones she would recount in her stories. Moments when, on a sunny day, he might have closed his book, gazed out the window, and noticed how the shape of the drifting clouds resembled scenes from the tale he had just read. In that moment, he might have wanted to converse with someone who had imagined the same scene. Angie believed that this might be why she had been chosen to be his companion among the many children on the island. She continued, saying that some of the stories she would tell might already be familiar to him, while others would have endings created purely from her imagination. She asked him to kindly listen and share his thoughts afterward, promising that even if he found her stories nonsensical, she wouldn't take offense. Kylek responded indifferently, stating that even if she were to take offense, it would have no effect on him whatsoever. He told her to proceed with her storytelling. Angie felt a surge of happiness that he had given her the chance to tell him a story. She nodded eagerly, ready to begin. However, Kylek warned her that if her tale turned out to be absurd nonsense, he wouldn't hesitate to have her thrown out. Angie assured him that she understood. She had always enjoyed telling stories, and everyone at church had always enjoyed them. She then asked if he was familiar with the story of the Cumnian Sibyl, and proceeded to recount the tale of the ancient Greek prophetess. As she told the story, Angie's throat became dry and parched, and she felt a strange unease, as if the very atmosphere around her had shifted, but Lord Kylek allowed her to finish without interruption or asking her to leave. Finally, Angie left the room without any issues, but she couldn't help but remember that Kylek had called for her to return the following week at the same time. She was overjoyed that he had called her name, and as she walked away she thought how easy it had turned out to be to please him, much easier than she had expected. As she left, Angie thought about the story she would tell next time. She didn't notice, but Kylek was watching her from the window. A man was working late into the night, but it turned out that he wasn't working. He was trying to escape from the island. His parents had tried to stop him, telling him he had a blessed life. They reminded him that Duke Blackwell had gathered the families of war survivors and granted them land to live on. His parents believed the mainland was nothing but hell, but the man felt the opposite. He thought they were wrong, and that life on the island had become stifling. He wanted to leave and go somewhere else. He had packed food and water, ready to sail into the sea. As he was preparing to leave, he thought it was strange that no one had ever attempted to escape the island before. He believed it would be easy. No one had tried it until now. As he sailed away, he saw the wind turbines on the horizon, much bigger than he had expected. They were the only boundary between the island and the outside world. Once he passed them, he thought he would be free. But just as he got closer, something pushed his boat back. He couldn't understand what had happened, and then he saw someone, terrified, begging to be left alone. But the man couldn't spare him. Inside a locked case, a figure was begging for blood, but the young master only stood there in silence. The next morning, at Angie's house, everyone was impressed by her embroidery skills. Angie felt happy to see that people liked her work. She had stitched flowers onto a piece of cloth. The flowers were marigolds, and instead of using her name, they had become her little signature. People recognized the marigolds as Angie's unique touch, and Angie felt warm when she saw them. She hoped to one day create garments inspired by their beauty, with the goal of making clothes that could bring smiles to people. A girl who was present was so impressed by Angie's work that she declared she would hire her to make a dress for her. The girl's name was Letica, the only daughter of the Duke's administrator. Letica wanted Angie to work for her so badly that she proposed a formal contract. Everyone laughed and enjoyed watching Letica hug Angie, admiring how well they got along. But the lightheartedness soon gave way to concern when someone brought up troubling news. Small animals were being found dead around the forest. People were worried about what could have harmed the creatures. Angie didn't feel good about the dead animals. Just then, a man arrived, sweating heavily and hoping to share some news. He reported that Elliot's body had washed up on the southern coast. No one could believe it. Elliot, the only son of the Hawken family who managed the distillery. Angie was puzzled and asked, "Isn't Elliot the only son of the Hawken family? What on earth could have happened to him?" The man explained that Elliot had attempted to leave the island by boat the previous night. Some people believed that his death was divine punishment for betraying Duke Blackwell. The community took this as an opportunity to remind their children not to leave the island, reinforcing the idea that no one should ever attempt to escape. The adults in the village said that Elliot had tried to leave the island the previous night, only to be attacked by sharks. The news of his sudden death left the residents of the island in shock. For 4 days, Elliot's parents didn't speak to anyone. Angie had never witnessed anyone in such deep sorrow before, and yet, Mrs. Hawkins approached Angie one day and asked if she was off to run some errands. She commented on how beautiful the weather was, saying it felt as if they were receiving God's blessings. Angie found Mrs. Hawkins's sudden change in demeanor strange. The woman, who had looked deeply disturbed just the day before, was now smiling brightly, without a trace of sadness or shadow on her face. It was as if someone had wiped the sorrow from her memory entirely. Back at the castle, Angie thought about Mrs. Hawkins's behavior. She had never experienced sorrow herself, so she wondered if it was a feeling that could disappear in the blink of an eye. Kylek, noticing her distracted mood, responded that there must be more to things than met the eye. He suggested she have some tea to help calm her down, as it seemed she was still shocked by what she had witnessed. Angie thanked him and picked up the cup, sipping the tea. Kylek then reminded her that, while they were on the subject of Mrs. Hawkins's strange behavior, she should keep her observations between them. Just as she had found Mr. Hawkins's behavior odd, others might think it suspicious if she voiced similar thoughts. Angie nodded in understanding and promised to be careful, feeling thankful that Lord Kylek had listened to her. She wondered if he had found her comments objectionable, though she was surprised he had paid her any attention at all. Kylek, not missing a beat, told her that if she had any common sense, she would have kept her thoughts to herself without needing him to remind her. Angie smiled inwardly, thinking, I guess that was wishful thinking. She commented that the tea smelled nice, noting that it was a little different from the usual tea the islanders drank. Kylek offered her some of the tea leaves to take home, saying he would let Louise know. Angie eagerly accepted, thanking him. Kylek then brought up the story she had told him about the Kumean Sibyl, the priestess who had wished for immortality. He recalled how Apollo had granted her thousands of years of life, but she had only watched her body wither away over the years, realizing too late that she had been cursed, not blessed. Angie agreed, confirming that the Sibyl's wish had led to her suffering, not eternal happiness. Kylek then asked her what she would do if Apollo were to offer her immortality and eternal youth. Angie responded that she would turn it down. Kylek, curious, asked why. Angie explained that while she might have been tempted to accept such a gift without thinking, she believed that the beauty and meaning of life stemmed from its transience. Even the most exquisite flowers wilt when their time has come, only for new buds to sprout in their place. To her, that was the way of Providence itself. Kylek seemed intrigued, but pressed her further, asking if she was saying that immortality meant nothing to her. Angie nodded, saying she was sure there were plenty of people who would wish for eternal life, but it wasn't something she personally desired. Kylek, surprised, thought to himself that it was hard to believe there were still people like her left on the island. Just then, Louise knocked on the door, and Angie realized that her time was up. She told Kylek that she would be back next week, then left the room before Kylek could say anything further. After she left, Louise asked Kylik what he thought about the new remedy, wondering if it was a good match for him. Kylik frowned and told her not to call Angie by that name, as the mere mention of it put him in a foul mood. Kylik asked his father about what exactly a remedy was. He wanted to know what happened to someone if they were selected to be his remedy. His father answered that once someone was chosen, there was no going back. From that moment on, that person would be his remedy for all eternity. Kylik then asked, almost bitterly, if that was why his father had killed his mother, simply because she had been the remedy. His father explained that the concept of a remedy originated from a terrible curse, something born out of human greed and a desire for something that should never have been sought. Kylik declared to himself that he would never walk the same path as his father. Later, some girls were gossiping about Duke Blackwell's family. One girl asked if it was true that the Duke had other heirs. Another girl, who had overheard the adults talking, confirmed that years ago, the Duchess Eugenia had given birth to many children, including twins, but all of them had died shortly after birth, except for Lord Kylik. Afterward, the Duchess had also passed away. The girls whispered about the rumors surrounding Lord Kylik's face, speculating that the medication he took had caused his face to become disfigured. They said that when he covered his face, he looked like a ghostly monster. Letica added that it was common knowledge that Kylik's temper was so foul that he supposedly beat his servants every day. Angie, overhearing this, couldn't hold back her defense of Lord Kylik. She said that they were being too harsh on him. She explained that while he could be sharp in tone, he was actually quite sensitive and considerate. The other girls questioned how Angie could know that. Letica asked if Angie had met Lord Kylik in person, or if she had just heard those things from others. Angie hesitated, recalling that her mother had told her to keep her visits to the manor a secret. She replied that she was simply saying it didn't seem right to gossip about someone when it was the Duke's benevolent rule that allowed them to live in prosperity. The other girls, somewhat reluctantly, agreed. Letica, though, admitted that while Angie was right, Kylik's face was off-putting, to be honest. Angie responded that she didn't know much about what he looked like. All she knew was that he was tall with a low voice, and despite his initially cold demeanor, he showed subtle consideration for others. She added that she had never really wondered about his face until now, and the only reason she had been afraid of him at first was because she had expected him to throw her out. But strangely, Angie couldn't shake Letica's words from her mind. Back at the castle, Angie thought she would probably not see Kylik that day, since she was told he had matters to attend to in his study. She waited for 20 minutes, starting to feel sleepy. As she looked out the window, she reflected on how beautiful the view was, though it was a pity that he could only enjoy it from afar. Angie didn't know exactly how ill Kylik was, but she thought it would be nice if they could go for a stroll together. As she dozed off, Kylik arrived, but Angie had already fallen asleep in her chair. Seeing her there, he covered her with a blanket and looked at her quietly. Earlier, Jerome had mentioned to Kylik that the rumors originating from the church had spread among the children. Kylik, worried, assumed that Angie must think of him as some terrible monster because of those rumors. Jerome reassured him that it wasn't the case, and that Angie had actually been quite protective of him, showing a reaction that no one else had. He offered to take care of the matter, but Kylik declined, saying there was no need to concern themselves with such trivial matters, and asked Jerome to just keep an eye on things. Kylik reflected on how remarkable it was that Angie had such a different mindset from the others. It made him want to expect even more from her. He thought to himself, "Angie Risdell, I want you to..." But he didn't finish his thought aloud. Angie woke up startled and immediately called out for Lord Kylik. He instructed her to keep her eyes closed. Angie was confused, wondering why he wasn't behind the canopy as usual, and what was happening. Kylik told her it would be best for her to go home today, as he had matters that needed his attention. Still dazed, Angie responded with a polite yes, and she noticed the scent of roses surrounding him. Kylik, however, asked her to visit him 3 times a week from now on, expressing his desire to hear more of the stories she told. Angie, surprised but pleased, asked if she could really come that often, and Kylik affirmed that he would be looking forward to her visits. Angie returned home to the cottage where she helped her parents with housekeeping. It was a peaceful place, especially near the northern cliff, which made it cool and refreshing during summer. While walking there, she noticed that the roses were in full bloom, meaning that the harvest would soon begin. She remembered that around this time, Blackwell produced a powder from Bengal roses, which they mixed with water for the islanders to consume. The smell of the roses was heavenly, and Angie thought about how similar the scent was to Lord Kylik. She still couldn't believe what he had said earlier, and the more time she spent at the Blackwell Manor, the more she wondered about the kind of person Lord Kylik truly was. Later, while at the manor, Angie asked Kylik if he could pull back the canopy slightly, but he immediately refused. She accepted his answer, though she thought about how strict he could be at times. Then Louise came in with a gift from Kylik, a batch of cookies, as he had noticed that Angie seemed to enjoy them. Angie smiled and thanked Louise. Curious, Angie asked Lord Kylik what kind of food he liked best and if he had a favorite dessert. He responded with a dismissive comment, almost laughing at her question. Angie couldn't help but feel that sometimes Kylik drew a line between them, though she had moments when she saw glimpses of his warmth, like the late afternoon sun. At times she caught him off guard, and once she even made him laugh, though she wasn't sure if she'd really done so. Still, she wondered what expression he had when he looked at her, and she wished she could see the person behind the veil. Later that day, Angie overheard some rumors about animals mysteriously dying in the forest. This unsettling news stayed in the back of her mind, but when her mother called her to finish hanging the laundry, she set the thought aside and returned to her chores. While she was leaving for the manor the next day, Angie thanked the carriage driver, saying she'd work her way to the entrance today since the weather was so nice. He encouraged her to take her time and enjoy the garden. As she walked along the familiar path, she reflected on how long it had been since her first visit to the manor. The gentle warmth of the sunlight and the sweet scent of flowers filled the air, and Angie realized that autumn was soon approaching, bringing with it the passage of time. As she reached the manor, she was greeted by Louise, who welcomed her warmly. Angie responded with a cheerful good morning. Before she knew it, she had reached the age of 18. 3 years had passed. During those years, which felt both long and fleeting, Angie's relationship with Lord Kylik had undergone many changes. One day, as Angie began to tell Lord Kylik a story, he suddenly interrupted and asked her to call him Kai from then on. Surprised, Angie agreed. As the day grew late, she noticed the time and began to prepare to leave. Kai told her that dinner had already been prepared and that she should eat before leaving. He also offered that she could stay and have her meal there if she wished. Angie remarked on how much she loved the assortment of fine teas he kept, noting that she usually only had rose tea at home. Kai replied that he wanted to give her an additional reason to visit, hinting that he was making it special for her. As her bond with Kai grew stronger, Angie found herself eagerly looking forward to their moments together. It was different from the story of Psyche, who had used a candle to illuminate the face of the god Eros. Angie, however, had neither the courage nor the folly to steal a glance at him. And so, the years passed. One winter, Kai noticed that Angie had caught a cold again. It wasn't as severe as previous times, but she had a mild cough. He seemed concerned and remarked that this was the same complaint she had had the year before, and he didn't like it. Then, in a surprising turn, Kai told Angie that her birthday was approaching and that he wanted to give her a gift. Angie was shocked by his words. Memories of the past gifts he had given her over the past 3 years flashed through her mind. She thought to herself that he always surprised her with gifts, without asking her what she wanted. Kai explained that this year, for her 18th birthday, he wanted to honor her coming of age with something special. Angie felt as though he could read her thoughts, as if he was able to know exactly what she needed. She reflected on all the gifts he had already given her, never having thought about what she would ask for. She hesitated, wondering if there was something she could wish for that could truly capture what she felt. Before she could finish her sentence, there was a sudden coughing sound from the canopy. Concerned, Angie called out to him, but Kai told her not to come closer. Some of the servants entered the room, and Louise, one of the servants, hurried Angie away, urging her to come quickly. Angie couldn't help but wish for one thing: to be allowed to cross the divide between her and Kai. She longed to run to him and embrace him, but she knew that this was not possible. Later, as Angie prayed, she reflected on her feelings, comparing her minor cold to the suffering Kai was clearly enduring. She prayed that her prayers would reach the heavens, hoping for his recovery. Returning to her parents' home that evening, Angie noticed something unusual. Someone was discussing something quite serious in the distance. She didn't want to concern herself with it and hurried inside. Upon entering, her parents greeted her warmly, and her mother handed her a letter from House Blackwell. Angie was surprised. The letter's handwriting was familiar, and she wondered what it could be about. The letter read, "Dear Angie, you must have been startled by the events of this afternoon. As much as I would like to speak to you in person, my current condition does not allow for it. Therefore, I have decided to write you instead. I regret that I will need to focus on receiving treatment from now on. However, as I mentioned before, I would like to give you something special for your birthday. Please let me know your desired gift. Once I have recovered and returned to my chamber on the 3rd floor, I hope you will be the first person I see. May God's grace and blessings be with you." Reading the letter, Angie felt a deep sense of gratitude and longing. She was touched that Kai was still caring for her despite his own suffering. Louise, meanwhile, informed Kai that he needed a blood transfusion from the remedy immediately. Kai, however, insisted that he had no intention of receiving it. Louise tried to argue, but Kai firmly repeated that he would never allow anything to harm Angie. Angie was filled with relief upon receiving a letter from Kai. She had been consumed with worry about his condition, and the letter reassured her. She hoped for his treatment to go smoothly, no matter how long it took. She would wait to greet him when he returned, and there was nothing she desired for her birthday, except for one wish. She hesitated, but eventually she wrote that her wish was to see his face. Kai, on the other hand, had been deeply moved by Angie's presence. He expressed that she had no idea what thoughts crossed his mind whenever he saw her. Her genuine smile, unlike the others, her ability to speak her mind without being swayed by others, and her refusal to yearn for eternal life, all these things enchanted him. He was captivated by her small, delicate hands, her luscious hair, her brilliant eyes, and the way her cheeks would blush when she was shy. He admitted that he struggled to control his feelings whenever he saw her lips. But more than anything, he wondered if, after learning his secrets, she would still stay by his side. Meanwhile, at home, Angie was having a cozy moment with her parents. She had been sick with a cold, and her mother had made her a favorite dessert, one that she recognized as being made from strawberries from Mary's farm. Angie's mother insisted that she eat her favorite food since she couldn't seem to shake her cold. Her father encouraged her to dig in, and her mother also suggested she drink some water to help with the cough. Once she felt better, her parents recommended having some rose tea, which they drank often because it worked wonders for health. As they talked, Angie's mother asked about her work with the children in the chapel, and Angie confirmed that she had been helping them learn to sing. Her mother inquired if the children had been good, to which Angie replied that they were adorable little sparrows. When asked about the songs, Angie explained that they had been learning children's songs prepared by Letitia, but Letitia had asked her to come up with something of her own for the next session. Angie was thinking about what song she should teach, maybe something about the sea or the night. In the midst of this, a sudden thought struck Angie. She began to hum a melody, but when her mother and father didn't recognize it, she was puzzled. She couldn't remember where she had heard the tune, but it had popped into her head out of nowhere. Her mother and father both said they had never heard the song before. Angie found it strange that she could remember the melody, but couldn't place where it had come from. Later, as the evening grew late, Angie's mother told her to get ready for bed. Tomorrow was her birthday, and her mother promised to make something special to celebrate. Angie was excited and replied that she couldn't wait. Her mother wished her good night, and Angie wished her the same in return. As Angie lay in bed, she found herself still thinking about that mysterious melody. She couldn't remember anyone singing it to her, and it lingered in her mind. That night, as the sun set over the sea and the crescent moon glowed, Angie's dreams began to take a strange turn. She heard a voice calling out to her, asking if she could hear or see the speaker. The voice seemed to be trying to get her attention, but she couldn't make out who it was. The voice spoke of a song, asking if she recognized it, and though it sounded familiar, she couldn't quite place it. The name the person gave her also remained elusive. She was left baffled in her dreams, wondering what it all meant. Angie woke up, still unsure whether the previous night had been a dream. The memories felt so real, though the events that had transpired were strangely elusive. Her mother called out to her from the doorway, asking if she was awake. Angie responded, groggily affirming that she was. Her mother told her to come outside and take a look at something. A pile of gifts was waiting for her, including one from House Blackwell. Curious, Angie wondered aloud what the gifts might be. As she looked through the pile, one particular package caught her attention, a note addressed to her, which read, "To Angie, lover of winter and snow." Angie recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Kai. She quickly read the letter. "Dear Angie, I wish you a joyful 18th birthday. Though it is a pity that I cannot deliver this in person, know that my letter contains my sincerest wishes. May this day be your happiest, and may your joy extend beyond tomorrow and into the days after. I am doing my best to recover, so please wait just 10 more days. I shall give you your real gift then. The item I am sending along with this letter is a snow globe, which allows you to experience the beauty of snow all year round, as if it were always your birthday. I hope you like it." Angie marveled at the snow globe, finding it incredibly beautiful, almost as if it were a scene straight out of a fairy tale. She couldn't help but feel a warm sense of gratitude toward Kai. The other gifts were thoughtful, but this snow globe felt like a special token from him. She wondered what he meant by real gift, speculating that it might mean he would finally reveal himself to her in person. Her mother, seeing her excitement, remarked how delightful it was. She pointed out that this was the first time Kai had sent her a birthday gift. She asked if Kai had grown fond of her, and Angie felt a flush of embarrassment if she was sure. Her mother affirmed, saying that Kai's birthday was the very next day. Angie was stunned, realizing she had been unaware of Kai's birthday for the past 3 years. Her mother explained that both Duke Blackwell and Lord Kai preferred to let their birthdays pass quietly, without any celebration. She told Angie not to mention it the next time she visited, as it was an unspoken rule in House Blackwell. Angie struggled to understand why they would avoid such an important occasion. She expressed her discomfort at the idea, feeling that birthdays were special, and it upset her whenever she saw people foregoing such celebrations. She also voiced her concern about Kai's health, wondering what illness he might have. Her heart ached for him, knowing that he couldn't experience the simplest joys of life. Her mother responded firmly, advising Angie never to voice such concerns in front of others. She explained that House Blackwell was no ordinary family. They carried heavy burdens, and it was important for people like them to respect their wishes. However, her mother suggested that if Angie truly felt worried, she could pray for Lord Kai. That night, Angie prayed for Kai, writing in her journal about her birthday celebration, filled with heartfelt wishes and many gifts. She thanked Kai for the snow globe, which had given her the gift of eternal winter. She expressed her hope that once Kai's treatments were complete, she would finally be able to see his smile. She clung to the wish that he would be restored to health, hoping he could experience the joys he deserved. The next day, as Angie walked outside, she overheard a conversation near the corner. The voices were talking about a blood transfusion and a remedy, but the details were vague and fragmented. Angie stood there, bewildered, trying to make sense of what she had heard. One of the voices mentioned Mrs. Dunst and how the procedure went against their teachings. The conversation ended abruptly, and Angie was left confused. She wondered what they were talking about. Had she seen those people before? As she turned the corner, she noticed a man approaching her. He smiled politely and greeted her, mentioning that their paths had crossed before. He asked if she remembered him. Angie was startled when the man spoke to her, asking if she had not seen him before. She quickly assured him that she had indeed seen him. The man explained that he was there to help his aunt, who served as a caretaker at the chapel. Angie, recognizing the name, responded with a sudden realization. She guessed that his aunt must be Hester, and the man confirmed it. As Angie reflected on the man, she realized that the woman who had been with him the last time she saw him must have been Hester. She remembered something her mother had once told her. Hester's older sister had passed away from an illness many years ago. The child she had raised, the man in front of her, was born with a delicate constitution and had rarely left the house. Angie recalled her mother saying that he had albinism, which might explain why his eyes appeared purple. It seemed to mirror Kai's situation in some ways, and Angie couldn't shake the comparison. The man then asked her if she still didn't trust him. Angie hesitated, unsure of what to say. She started to respond but was cut off when the man offered to walk her home, noting how late it was and how dark the night had become. Angie declined, saying she was fine and often took that path alone. She quickly said goodbye and walked away. The man sighed, feeling disappointed that he hadn't even had a chance to tell her his name. Later that night, as Angie slept in her room, she found herself dreaming again. This time the man appeared in her dream, calling out to her, but she was unable to speak. Suddenly a blazing fire erupted from nowhere, and she could not understand where it had come from. The man in her dream told her that they would meet again and not to forget him. He introduced himself as Martin Silva. Angie awoke abruptly, her heart pounding, and her breath coming in heavy gasps. The dream was still vivid in her mind when she suddenly heard a scream. It sounded eerily similar to the one she had heard in her dream. Driven by curiosity and unease, she decided she had to investigate. She wondered aloud if the sound had come from a beast or if it had been something else entirely. As she moved cautiously in the direction of the noise, she noticed something watching her from the bushes. Her heart raced, and in her fright, she dropped her lamp. She saw a massive shadow moving toward her and panic set in. But just as the shadow loomed closer, Kai emerged from the darkness. Angie couldn't see him clearly in her frightened state, and before she could react, she fainted. However, just as she was about to fall, Kai caught her in his arms. In a soft, almost wistful voice, he whispered, "Angie, how am I going to give you your gift now?"